Hey there, Eric Meyer here. I'm actually coming at you today from the office instead of my shop because the shop is just way too cold to be doing this intro. For today's video, I've started another hand plane project and I'm going to walk you through everything that I've done up until this point. But more so than anything, this video is really about my failures when it came to this specific project. And our missteps and failures, I don't think we talk enough about on social media, so that's what the focus of this video really will be. And spoiler alert, I had to scrap it and start all over. So let's dive in. So starting things off, the first thing I need to do is get this bar clean, get rid of all the dirt and the grease and grime, whatever else is on it. So now I'm getting ready to do the layout, mark where I need to cut it, and if you look closely, you can see right when I messed up, and it is here. So just for a little bit of context, normally when I make hand planes, I use Precision Ground 01 tool steel for my soles. For this plane though, I switched over and I'm using cold rolled mild steel. For this one, I'm trying to keep the material choices roughly historically accurate, and the cold rolled mild steel happened to be in the exact size that I needed. I thought I'd save myself a little bit of work in trying to get everything to size, and that's what I purchased. What I forgot to do though is check to make sure that everything is flat and square and straight and whatever else it needs to be. I wasn't thinking about it because I am in the habit of using Precision Ground steel, and it already comes that way. So on this piece of steel, it actually ended up having both a cup in it and a twist. And I forgot to check, and that killed the entire project. Now, with that said, I'll dive into that deeper later on, but let's see how far I actually got before I realized it. All right, so continuing on, got my layout all done. For the first cut, this bar starts off at 24 inches, so I actually need just 12 inches of that for this particular hand plane. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut it in half. And then once it's been cut in half, I'm gonna go ahead and cut it again so I can get my front and my rear sole out of it. That'll just make it a lot easier for me to form the mouth. And ultimately, I want this to be an incredibly fine mouth. I'm talking like a millimeter wide, and so it's much easier to do it in two parts than it is to try to do it in one part. After I have it rough cut on the Portaband, I took it over to my little Sherline mill, and for anybody who's not necessarily familiar with that, it's a very small bench top mill. So I have a 3/8 inch end mill in here, and that's the biggest end mill that I can put in this. So it's not a Bridgeport. You're not going to haul off a lot of material, but it works out really well for a lot of the smaller projects I do. This one is pushing its limits in some ways, but this cut here to just clean up the that bandsaw cut works out just fine. All right, now moving on, more layout. So I'm going to go ahead and lay out the mouth. I'm going to get the angle put in, and for that I am using 22 degrees for the bed, and I've had the side laid out. I have a line of where I cannot cross for that bed. So all of that gets laid out here in the beginning. And now moving on to a hacksaw, and I'm going to use the hacksaw to remove a bulk of the waste here. So I'm basically just kind of cutting it at an angle and trying to not cross any of my lines. So the first line is the bottom of the plane at the very front. I don't want to go any lower than that with the saw. And you can see on the left-hand side, on the top of the sole, that line there is where I need to stop short of, so I can make sure I have the right angle and everything. And honestly, the hacksaw didn't take too terribly long to rough everything out. It took about 12 minutes. Probably would have been shorter if I wasn't trying to film it. So let's go ahead and speed through the rest of this. Now, I could have taken this over to the mill. One thing though with the mill is that mill isn't made for hogging off a lot of material quickly. It's not a Bridgeport substitute. The things it does really well, but for bulk stock removal, usually other options are somewhat faster or more efficient. And honestly, this wasn't too terrible just doing it by hand. The other option I had available to me was using a angle grinder and just grinding it roughly close to my lines. But really, I probably would have spent just as much time cleaning up all the grinding dust that got thrown everywhere than it was to just do it by hand. So Did it by hand. It wasn't awful. So now I'm on to using hand files, and I'm going to start off with a round file. I'm pretty much just using that like a scrub plane. It really gets off all the high spots. So once I'm done with the round file, I move over to a flat file, and I just want to get close to the lines now. From here, I have a couple options available to me. I could take it over the mill and just do some finishing cuts at the correct angle just to get everything right where it needs to go. The other option I have is using a file guide, and you just take a hardwood block at the correct angle, clamp it to your sole, and use that, kind of file against that to help cut everything in. So I actually decided to use the file guide. The files were moving pretty fast, and trying to clamp that file guide to this sole is when I realized, hey, things are not quite as square as I thought they should be. I have two squares set up, and they're acting basically like winding sticks. And I'll go ahead and put some colorful lines on screen so you can see a little bit better. If you look closely in the back, that rear square is pretty close at the bottom, but at the top it actually kicks out to the left. So that's illustrating that there's a slight twist in that sole there. So for this next photo here, the one on the right I know is flat. I'm using that as an illustrative reference. The one on the left is the piece I've been working on, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of curve in that, a little bit of a cup. Not so great for a hand plane sole. That means scrapping this project entirely. And you know what, actually though, it's still a good piece of steel. I'm gonna find some use for it somewhere. So one simple mistake, and I ended up scrapping this part of the project and burned through about a day before I realized anything had gone wrong. So I went ahead and ended up ordering a piece of precision ground steel just to work off of it. So hopefully I can avoid this in the future for the rest of this project. I had a couple options here. I could have, if I didn't order that new piece of steel, the other option would have been trying to flatten out what I had. Currently it's about 2.5 by 12, and that's just a little bit too big for my mill to mill that all flat efficiently. The other option would be the granite plate and a lot of sandpaper, and I didn't really want to do that either. So really it kind of comes down to like where do you want to put the effort? Is it in your time or is it in the materials? And I felt like my time was a little more valuable than the materials were. So that's why I ended up ordering something different that was already flat, and then I don't have to do it myself. That steel is still good though. Despite it having a little bit of a twist or a cup, I can use it for something else. I have plans for other hand planes that are actually going to be much smaller. So using that as the raw stock and flattening it out with the tools I have on hand will be much easier for those smaller projects. So it'll still get used. With all that said, this project is going to be on hold just for a little bit. I got to wait for that new piece of steel to arrive. Thank you so much for following along. I truly appreciate it. If you want to help out the channel, the easiest way and the most effective way to do so is liking and subscribing and sharing the videos around. Additionally, if you want to check out more of my work, I've left a link in the description below to my own personal website. There you can also find hand tools that I've made for sale. Currently though, the site is going to redirect you to Etsy if you want to check those out. My site's undergoing a renovation of sorts. All that's on Etsy at the moment. And thank you so much for following along. I truly appreciate it, and I will catch you on the next one.